Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive deep into the hidden biological damage of chronic stress and look at the scientifically validated microinterventions that can actually reset your nervous system. In modern life, we so often view our declining focus, our terrible sleep, and that feeling of just daily exhaustion as some sort of personal failing. But what if the problem isn't your work ethic? What if it's your biology? Today, we're taking a premium masterclass level look into the interconnected web of your health. We're going to see exactly how micromental health affects your sleep, how that sleep dictates your brain health, how your brain health controls your ability to do deep work, and how chronic stress ultimately wreaks absolute havoc on your gut health and metabolism. It is all connected. So let's dive right in.
We have to start with a really profound realization about modern burnout. Your system isn't malfunctioning, it's maxed. Think about it. We are constantly trying to solve a biological capacity problem with time management tools. We buy a fancy new planner, we download the latest productivity app, and we try to squeeze just a little more output from a biologically depleted machine. But listen, more time is not going to solve this. More capacity will. And that capacity, it lives entirely in your nervous system.
Let's jump into our first major section, the evolutionary stress mismatch. We need to understand why our evolutionary hardware is fundamentally out of sync with today's professional landscape.
Okay, so evolution designed our stress response for very short, very intense bursts of physical mobilization. Picture literally sprinting away from a physical predator. That's acute stress. But today, we use that exact same biological hardware to, say, answer work emails at midnight. The crazy thing is, our bodies absolutely cannot tell the difference between a physical threat to our survival and a psychological threat to our ego. The chemical response in your brain is identical, but the physical clearance mechanism, the actual running away, is completely gone.
The scientific literature paints an incredibly stark reality here. This evolutionary mismatch literally turns a vital physiological survival mechanism into a modern pathology. Because you're just sitting at a desk instead of physically fleeing a threat, those stress hormones have nowhere to go. And this chronic activation, it's a primary driver of systemic hypertension, severe metabolic dysfunction, and suppressed immunity. It's literally accelerating your biological aging and degrading your overall health span.
So, to truly grasp the deep biological damage happening inside us, we need to trace the neurobiology of burnout straight into the endocrine system. Let's look at the biology of burnout.
What we're looking at here is a step-by-step biological chain reaction known as the HPA axis, the hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal axis. This shows exactly how a perceived psychological stress is translated into a very real physical cascade. It starts in the brain, where the hypothalamus secretes a hormone called CRH. That signals the pituitary gland to release ACTH, which then finally screams at your adrenal glands to flood your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. Now, this is a brilliant system for surviving a lion attack, but it is disastrous when it's being triggered all day long by your inbox.
And this leads us to a fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying metabolic reality called glycogenolysis. See, cortisol's main job is energy mobilization. It signals your liver to break down stored glycogen and dump it straight into your bloodstream as glucose. The absolute crucial takeaway here is that your body is constantly dumping metabolic fuel, pure blood sugar, into your veins to fight a physical threat that literally does not exist.
This is exactly where the interconnected nature of your health systems becomes undeniable. With an acute cortisol spike, you get a rapid return to your baseline. But chronic cortisol exposure, that leads to sustained hyperglycemia. Because you aren't burning off that extra blood sugar by, running for your life, your pancreas has to pump out massive amounts of insulin to clear it. Over time, this constant tug-of-war alters your gut microbiome, creates severe insulin resistance, and drives visceral fat accumulation. Your psychological work stress is literally shifting your physical metabolic baseline.
So if chronic stress traps the body in this biological overdrive, burning through our cognitive reserves and spiking our blood sugar, how do we manually hit the brakes? And more importantly, how do we do it without needing a month-long sabbatical? Let's explore the power of microbreaks.
2,335. Take a second to process that number. That is the total number of participants analyzed in a landmark meta-analysis published in PLOS One. These researchers rigorously evaluated the exact physiological and psychological efficacy of microbreaks. We're not talking about long vacations here, folks. We are talking about highly strategic, evidence-based, tiny pauses injected into your workday.
And the data? It is incredibly clear. Taking a break of 10 minutes or less acts as a direct behavioral break. It gives you a significant boost to your vigor and a massive reduction in fatigue. But here's the real game changer. It effectively halts the depletion of your cognitive and emotional reserves. It protects those precious attention networks in your brain that are absolutely critical for deep work and high-level problem solving.
The mechanism behind this is known as the conservation of resources theory. Think of it like a gas tank. This proves that recovery doesn't actually require massive blocks of time. Strategic sub-10-minute discontinuities in your tasks naturally replenish your psychological resources. By stepping away before you hit the absolute bottom of your energy tank, you prevent the accumulation of fatigue. You're shifting from managing your time on a clock to managing your actual biological energy.
But what exactly should you be doing during these micro breaks to get the absolute maximum biological return on your investment? Let's move into our next section, cyclic sighing and breathwork. First identified by physiologists way back in the 1930s, the vagal brake is a concept that leverages the mechanical action of lung inflation to quite literally hijack your stress response. By intentionally extending your exhalations, you stimulate the vagus nerve. This instantly sends a signal up to your brain that the environment is completely safe, effectively slamming the brakes on that entire HPA axis cascade we talked about earlier.
Now here is the exact protocol. It's known as cyclic sighing, or the physiological sigh. It's so simple. Step 1, you take a deep, full inhale through the nose. Step 2, you take a short second nasal sip at the very top to maximally inflate your lungs. What this does is it physically pops open collapsed air sacs called alveoli deep in the lungs. And finally, step 3, you execute a long, slow, controlled exhale through the mouth. By just repeating this exact pattern for 5 minutes, you accelerate carbon dioxide offloading and immediately drop your heart rate.
And we know for a fact this works thanks to rigorous clinical trials. A major study out of Stanford School of Medicine demonstrated some profound findings. Participants who practiced cyclic sighing for just 5 minutes a day didn't just feel a little better in the moment, they physically lowered their resting respiratory rate for the entire rest of the day. That is huge. That's a sign of deep, lasting physiological calmness that improves your daily emotional resilience and perfectly primes your body for optimized, restorative sleep.
Think of this as your masterclass toolkit. You can actually target specific neurobiological pathways depending on exactly what you need in the moment. Cyclic sighing? That's your emergency brake for real-time stress relief. The 4-7-8 method? That maximizes vagal stimulation to combat insomnia and completely optimize your sleep architecture. And box breathing? That calibrates your carbon dioxide tolerance to enhance executive focus and mental clarity right before you dive into deep work. You are literally using your own breath as a remote control for your brain.
All right, let's pivot to the cognitive side of stress reduction. We're going to look at the 2-minute rule and see how incredibly brief time frames can clear out the mental clutter that causes so much of our background anxiety. So the 2-minute rule is incredibly straightforward. If an incoming, actionable task can be completed in 2 minutes or less, you execute it immediately. Now, this isn't just some clever productivity hack. This is a profound intervention in cognitive economics. By immediately knocking out these tiny tasks, you prevent the accumulation of what psychologists call open loops. These are unresolved commitments that chronically drain your prefrontal cortex's working memory. You're actively decluttering your mind, so you can preserve that capacity for deep, focused work later on. And there's actually a super powerful psychological application to this 2-minute window too. Former Marine and resilience expert Dr. Andrew Whitman uses a brilliant 120-second reframing technique. When you are faced with a totally overwhelming problem, you just ask yourself, if this were possible, how would I execute it? For just 2 minutes, you play make-believe. That forces the brain's organic search engine to entirely bypass emotional reactivity and self-limiting beliefs, and it prompts your prefrontal cortex to start generating viable, real-world solutions.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. Building true resilience requires a holistic, systems-level approach. When we stack these micro-interventions, the daily cyclic sighing, the 2-minute rule, strategic sub-10-minute micro breaks, vigorously protecting our sleep architecture, and supporting our gut and adrenal health with proper nutrition, we build an incredibly effective, interconnected shield. We stop just reacting to our stressful environment and start proactively managing our biological energy across our brain, our gut, and our sleep cycles.
Because as all of this clinical research reveals, managing stress isn't about eliminating all pressure from your life. Let's be real, in the modern world, that's completely impossible. Rather, it's about frequently and intentionally signaling physical safety to your brain to halt that toxic hormonal cascade. It's about using these science-backed micro-interventions to safeguard your cognitive health, lock in your metabolic stability, and ultimately guarantee your longevity and healthy aging.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought that I hope completely reframes your approach to productivity, to longevity, and to finding your body's hidden reset buttons. Ask yourself, Are you just trying to manage the hours in your day, or are you actively managing the biological energy required to actually live those hours fully? Because the science is abundantly clear. If you protect your biological capacity, the high performance will naturally follow. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to start implementing these interconnected microsolutions into your life today.